Hello everyone, Social Free State from socialfreestate.com here. This is a video that I've been wanting to do for quite a while, and it's about social anxiety, and I hope that it's helpful to men and women alike who are watching this video. It is something that I received therapy for after I had been raped, and obviously the rape which took place on me was politically incorrect, if you will, because I'm a white woman or a majority race raped by a minority race, and obviously included in the fact that he was minority race, he was also a migrant as well, and obviously in society today a lot of people feel very protective over migrants and minority races. So the need for therapy to do with social anxiety was very much needed. However, obviously many people will think to themselves, well, why didn't you have therapy for trauma? Unfortunately, this has been quite a bit of an issue, because when you report a crime to the police automatically refer you to a group called victim support. And victim support are meant to provide care for you so that you can hopefully deal with the traumatic event against you in the proper way and provide care for you. However, because the man who raped me was a complete stranger and I didn't know anything about him, and he was still, loose and, had not been caught. The police didn't know anything about him because I didn't know anything about him. Victim support actually refused to allow me to undergo any therapy for trauma. Their reason was because they suspected that if I had therapy and I talked about the event, then it would probe my recollections and memories, and then that would mean that the first account which I gave the police would become unreliable, because the story would likely have shifted and changed somewhat due to my deliberately investing in therapy based on memory. So they said that because the story would shift and change because of changes and all of those sorts of aspects to do with memory, then I would become an unreliable witness. And because I would become an unreliable witness, then it was very likely that the man who raped me would go free anyway on these sorts of technicalities. So as you can see, it's really difficult to get someone arrested, imprisoned for these sorts of crimes, because they'll use anything against you, and the defense will. And it was a real blow to learn that I wasn't allowed to receive any kind of therapy for the trauma which I went through. And as you can tell, because the grips are so tight on victims, and and the risk is so high that the accused won't get jailed or prison time for the crime they've committed, then I have to be particularly careful about the words and phrases which I use to describe the man. I am vague because I know nothing about him. I don't mention religion because I wouldn't know that kind of thing, that detail about him. I don't mention nationality because I wouldn't know that detail about him. And I do have to keep my description vague, in the effect that he had broken English and he was obviously a migrant. And I hope that people listening can understand that when hopefully other women speak out about this, they will also likely have to be very vague about with regards to the words and phrases which they use, if they want to see justice, and I do want to see justice. So what I had to do in the end was I had to go for, I needed therapy, obviously. I mean, something like that is really traumatizing, but I decided to go for therapy based on anxiety and social anxiety. Now, I've always struggled with social anxiety, but it was exacerbated by the fact that the crime against me was so politically incorrect that I was very aware at that time how difficult it would be to talk to people about what had happened to me, because people in today's society have generally want to protect those who are minorities, and particularly those who are migrants. They feel very protective over those people, and obviously, as a majority white female, sorry, I was going to say male. As a white female, then I'm, I'm a majority person and deserving of less care or consideration, I suspect, because that's the way that society is heading at the moment. So I dealt with social anxiety as a child. So why on earth was I dealing with social anxiety as a child? Okay, well, I grew up in a home a home environment where there was a very sensitive person. They would have discussions or conversations, and it seems as though they had a script in their head. So they had an expectation of how others would respond to them, and they envisaged all these sorts of conversations which they would have with people. And of course, no one's a mind reader. No one knew that these expectations existed within this person. So when these conversations was have being had, and I questioned what they were speaking about, even as a child, an inquisitive child, um, an argument would blow up, or a fight or something would blow up, and I started to become very scared about talking to people, because I didn't know what the consequences would be if I did speak to those people. I had a fear of talking to anybody, to be honest with you, and it was all to do with this one particular person. But arguments would start rising even as to the tone which I used. So it became particularly nitpicking, and anything would be cause for argument. And because because this is so frequent and it was with everybody, then I learned my behavior that I learned as a child would be that I would not speak to anybody, because if I didn't, I had learned that if I didn't speak to anybody, then I would never offend anybody. And that's literally how a behavior which I learned growing up in my home environment. And it's something that I'm struggling to get out of even now. But obviously, I don't want to be this sort of quiet person who doesn't have conversations with people. I do want to have conversations. I do want to have relationships with people, but I do find it very hard, and people do find it very hard to be around me as well, due to my lack of enthusiasm to get involved in discussions, for fear of how they might react. Um, as I grew up, obviously I became very fearful, and it also reflected badly as to how I was in school. So I started to become very much of a loner in school. I was very much disliked. I received a lot of bullying in school because of it, and it obviously just escalated. Now, when I was a teenager and able to move out, I had hoped that that would be the end of it. I wouldn't have to deal with this kind of, um, you know, over exaggerated expectation of how people must talk and people must respond and converse and all of that kind of thing. but obviously it's something that's actually grown within society, and it's really discouraging and disheartening that I ran away, as a young teenager, really, to get out of that environment, and actually it's just possessed a lot of society as a whole. Um, you hope that you don't have to be in that environment, but obviously it's a very popular thought process. Now, I would say that the experience which I faced as a child and growing up, and the fear that I felt, would be considered abuse to a certain extent, but obviously it continues in society at large today, and that's very concerning for me. And I am concerned that a lot of people are dealing with high needs of um, or high concerns of social anxiety, especially in today. You're constantly going to get it wrong, and you're constantly going to be negatively labelled. So that's why I've been wanting to talk about this issue and this particular piece for a while. So I underwent therapy and for cognitive behavioural therapy, and it was really useful to me. I had realised that I'd learned a lot of negative behaviours which were really holding me back in life, and I think that it's really useful to provide you with this title for a book, Mind Over Mood. Now, this book was really useful after I had gone through the full therapy which I received, and it provides you with a lot of details and thought records, and I'll talk about these thought records in a moment. I'll come back to that, but first of all I want to talk to you about the negative thinking, and these are certain aspects of how people think which are have it, they're emotional, and they're also thought processes which are based on emotions, and they reflect how your behavior how you behave in the future. So there's several which I'll just go through. There's all or nothing thinking. You view everything as entirely good or entirely bad. You don't do something perfectly. If you don't do something perfectly, you've failed. That's something which I was particularly bad for when I started undergoing the therapy. Overgeneralization. You see a single negative event as part of a pattern. For example, excuse me, you always forget to pay your bills. Yeah, I'm not sure that that was something which I was particularly prone to. I can't quite remember, but it's certainly not something that I'm prone to now. Mind reading. This is something that I was definitely prone to. You think you know what people think about you or something you've done, and it's bad. And that was something that I really had a lot of difficulty with. I was constantly thinking that people thought the worst of me. Fortune telling. You are certain that things will turn out badly. I'm not sure if I ever really dealt with that issue or was concerned with that, but it's definitely a possibility. Um, all or nothing thinking and mind reading was certainly thinking which I struggled with. Magnification and minimization. You exaggerate the significance of minor problems while trivializing your accomplishments. That's definitely something which I had real big issues with, and it also affected me in that I became comparative in my thinking, which is the bottom one. You measure yourself against others and feel inferior, even though the comparison may be unrealistic. And I was very bad for comparative thinking. I constantly did it, and I think that that's because people around me were comparing me to other people as well, which I I think that when you do that, or when other people start comparing you to other people, then you start, then it's something that you learn to do yourselves anyway. Um, should statements. You focus on how things should be, leading to severe self-criticism as well as feelings of resentment towards others. Now, that's not something that I am prone to, but obviously, having explained my home environment growing up, that's something which I was victim of. You know, obviously, the person who I'm speaking of definitely had the should statements, and definitely considered how things should be, and unfortunately I didn't meet those should be's, and it was difficult being in this response to not being able to provide those expectations. um, Personalization. You blame yourself for negative events and downplay the responsibility of others, which is something that is that I did have issues with, and I think that that's probably something relative to what's going on now in society, with what's going on with Rotherham victims and victims like myself of these migrant rapes. Um, I certainly don't blame myself for what happened, but I think that others downplay the responsibility of others. I am seeing that in societies at large today. There's also mental filtering. You see only the negative aspects of any experience. I don't think that I was prone to that. I am a negative thinker. Oh, I certainly was a negative thinker, but I don't think that I don't think that I thought negatively of experiences, but rather of myself. So I had very low self-esteem when I went for this therapy, incredibly low self-esteem. Emotional reasoning. You assume that your negative feelings reflect reality. Feeling bad about your job means I'm doing badly and will probably get fired. Um, that may have been something that I was dealing with at that time. Obviously, I was dealing with a lot of trauma, and I'd also gone through brain surgery at that time as well. So I was probably feeling incredibly negative. But I don't really remember that kind of feeling throughout my life. And obviously, there's comparative thinking, which I thought read earlier. So these are negative kind of thinkings and emotions which we are all prone to, male and female. And it's something which then becomes reflective in the next part, which is the thought record. Now, this is provided within this book here, the Mind Over Mood book, and you come across the thought record. However, you can also print off these, if you just type in thought record into a search engine, you'll come across these, which you can probably print off for free. But I would advise people to just read these sorts of books first, because I'm certainly not a therapist. So there's 7 stages to the thought record. Describe the situation, identify the rate and your mood, identify automatic thoughts or images, and these are negative thoughts. Facts that support my hot thoughts or your automatic thoughts. Thoughts that do not support my hot thoughts or what are automatic thoughts. Balanced, realistic or objective thought, and rate how I feel now. And this is really helpful, so I'll just explain how I used it. I'll use some examples. So an example would be telling friends that I was raped by this migrant, and it provides lots of questions at the bottom, which are: what were you doing? Was anyone with you? All this sort of thing. Um, well, they're irrelevant to what I'm considering doing. So you would just write, considering telling my friends about what has happened to me. Identify and rate your mood, and that would be rating your mood from 0 to 100%. And obviously at that time I was feeling very low, and it would have been probably around 20%, something like that. Identify automatic thoughts or images. Now this is where it all starts to get a bit interesting, because it's the advice is, what was I thinking of just before I started to feel this way? What does this say about me? What does this mean about me, my life, or my future? What is my fear? What am I afraid will happen? What is the worst that can happen? So I'll go through these. What am I thinking of just before I start to feel this way? Well, I'm feeling that I'm alone and I want to share the situation with someone else so that I have support. What does this say about me? Well, I probably at that time would have said that it showed that I was weak, but I would say now that it's it's just natural to want to share, to want to seek support. What does this mean about me, my life, or my future? I don't really know. I don't know that that's relevant. What is my fear? Well, my fear was, and what am I afraid will happen? My fear was that they would find it offensive what I was saying, and that they would stop being my friend. And of course, that did happen. What is the worst that can happen? That I lose my friendships was what I was fearful of. And what does this mean about how other people or the person thinks or feels about me? Well, that would mean that they didn't really care about me in the first place. And what does this mean about the world and the people in the world in general? Well, it means that we've we've reached a very bad, poor state of affairs, doesn't it? Um, so facts that support my hot thoughts. Um, I think at that point I used this would be things which have happened in the past, which reflect and show support for my fears and my negative concerns. And I suppose my fact for my hot thoughts was that I never really had any friendships, and I wasn't really able to express myself in the past as a child or as a teenager or young adult. So that would have supported my fears, that I wasn't able to fully express myself and would be judged, or someone would be act on the defensive. And facts that do not support my hot thoughts. Um, at that point, I suppose the only support which I had received pretty much would have been just the police and their dispute with victim support, but it wouldn't have been anything personal. It would have just been from a professional point of view, on the police behalf. Balance realistic or objective thoughts. So you apply these objective thoughts to all of these negative feelings which you have, which would go to say, well, obviously they weren't very good friends. They have an agenda. You know, they really don't care about me and anything that I've been through, and probably good time to get rid of them anyway. And how do you rate yourself now in the last box? Well, obviously, still feeling pretty bad because I was pretty aware at that time that I was likely to lose my friends, and I did. So I think that at that point I was preparing myself for that. Um, but luckily I'm an introvert anyway, so, and I think that I'm not sure if it in being an introvert is a learned behavior, but I've certainly been able to deal with situations alone, and I do find that I do like being in my own company more than with other people. um I guess this would be something that I could have applied, and I did apply actually to for fighting the battle, the case which I went through. Obviously, I self-represented myself. So describe the situation, concerned that solicitors won't speak out sincerely about my fears with regards to the crime against me. Identify your rate and your mood, not to 100%. I was pretty convinced that they wouldn't speak out about what I wanted them to say. So that again was about 20%, I guess. Identify automatic thoughts or images. Well, automatic thoughts were that authorities didn't stick up for or didn't look out for those girls and victims of Rotherham and the 72 other towns and cities who were where young girls and women were victimized and sexually exploited by the Pakistani grooming gangs. And obviously, I don't know whether whether the man who raped me was Pakistani or Muslim, but obviously a different race, different culture, and they were protected because of that. So I didn't believe that I would be protected by solicitors. If you go through the questions, what was I thinking just before I started to feel this? That I don't trust the authorities. What does this say about me? That I've got to be self-reliant. What does this mean about me, my life and my future? That I'm going to have to start learning the law and the legal system if I don't trust the authorities to look after me. What is my fear? What am I afraid will happen? Well, I suppose my fear was that I would lose the case if I fought it myself. But my fear was also that if I asked a solicitor to represent my case, they wouldn't speak the full truth, which I wanted them to. What does this mean about how other people or the person thinks or feels about me? That's really irrelevant. And what does this mean about people or the world in general? Well, it obviously says a lot about the protection of minorities and the lack of support and care given to the majority race. Facts that support my hot thoughts. Well, there are so many. You know, there's Rotherham and Newcastle. There's Peterborough, Oxford, Rochdale, was it, or something? There's so many. I think there's 72 towns and cities to support that. Need I go on? Facts that do not support my hot thoughts. My fear being that I would fail to represent myself well. I suppose I disputed with the fact that I had gone through tribunals, be it employment tribunals, so very different to this sort of situation. But I had represented myself in employment tribunals as well. So and I had won against big companies. So I was pretty confident that I can win cases, but I wasn't sure whether I could deal with this situation because it was very different in the sense that it was to do with very personal matters such as a crime against me. Balanced, realistic or objective thoughts. So I balanced and made it more realistic and objective in the sense that I thought, well, what if I take on this case and I do fail, but I record and I document what happened so that I can reflect on it later if I do lose, and I can still provide information to other victims who want to self-represent themselves. And on reflection, I can also state where I went wrong in self-representing. So I kind of felt that there was a positive even if I lost this case, and obviously it's still ongoing even now. But yes, I did feel that there would probably be a positive even if I did lose the case, and I'd still be able to help other people who might feel courageous enough to take on the legal system by themselves as well. And I think that with the lack of legal aid, then people probably will be having to do that. And I hope that I do encourage other people. So I did think that there was many benefits to fighting this case myself, far beyond just winning. Rate how you feel now. 0 to 100. I suppose my mood would have been lifted to about 40 or 50%. So it's really helpful to go through these sorts of thought record things, and you can do it on the minutest sort of details as well. And it's really worth looking into these negative thoughts, trying to identify which you're prone to. And I would recommend getting a book similar to this, or this one as well, and I'm sure that it would really help you try to overcome your own anxieties and your own depression and um, low self-esteem as well. I had terrible low self-esteem throughout my life, and I still do struggle with low self-esteem, but I think that it's picking up quite a bit now. I found a lot of confidence, and my hope was to find to become more assertive in my thinking and in my actions and behavior. And I think that that has worked with this cognitive behavioral therapy. I really recommend people who are dealing with depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem to sort of undergo that kind of therapy. It does make you feel a lot worse before it makes you feel better, but I really highly recommend it. And for those who obviously it costs money, and I'm still on a waiting list 2 years later to receive therapy for trauma because the police won the argument. So I do try to apply this to trauma as well. I'm not sure if you meant to, but hell, what does it matter? Yeah, I really recommend that people try and find some books which will help you, especially if you're on a longer waiting list, or if you are not able to afford the healthcare and the appointments. It's really worth going through these sorts of steps to change your thinking, your emotions, and your behaviour. It's incredibly positive. I hope that that's been a useful video for you. I do want to do a few more pieces on some similar situations. There's a book which I've got which is role playing basically, and it's actually for children because I've noticed that my son is also very nervous about upsetting people, and I do want to sort of and it's for assertiveness. And I read it before I have used it with my son, and it's actually really useful for adults as well. Well, it is for me anyway, and I'm an adult, so I thought that I'd go over it. You might not, it might not be something that you need to you know hear about, but you don't have to watch the video. But I just find these sorts of things really useful, and they've really helped me and transformed me. And obviously I've done a lot of positive things. I have become far more assertive, and I feel a lot better emotionally and in my thought processes as well. So I hope that I encourage other people to that there is a way out of this you know devastating low self-esteem. I've been there myself. I know that it affects men and women alike, and I hope that my talking about this encourages other people who are also dealing with extreme low self-esteem and extreme social anxiety or general anxiety, I hope that you will seek for help, whether it be self-help or therapy or a bit of both like I did myself. I hope you do find a way out of this. I do believe that there is a way out of it, and I wish you all well in your futures as you do try to get yourselves out of these horrendous feelings of misery, which I've also experienced. And good luck to you all who do choose to do that. Please like and subscribe if you like this. Thank you very much. Bye.